Hello, what's up? I'm going to talk about Sean Grayson. We're going to talk about Sean Grayson's prior behavior and the consequences of his prior behavior, as we know, was Sonya Massey. She lost her life. So let's not waste any time and let's get right into it. So what do we know about Sean Grayson? One of the things we know about Mr. Grayson is that he had a criminal record. And let's take a look at it. DUIs and integrity concerns of Mr. Grayson. So what we clearly know is that Mr. Grayson was not a stand-up officer. Grayson was discharged from the Army after misconduct, described only as a serious offense. Now, people, we don't know what that serious offense was. We'd love to know. I'm sure there's federal laws and privacy laws in place that do not allow us to know. But that could have been enough for these multiple police agencies that chose to employ Mr. Grayson to say, no, we don't have a spot for you here. Whatever it is, it was enough for the Army to let you go. We don't want you patrolling our streets in our community with our citizens. Because, as we can clearly see, something seriously bad could happen to a person. While Grayson was in the Army, he was charged with driving under the influence, August 10, 2015. Grayson's former first sergeant, in writing a recommendation letter for him at a job at the Auburn Police Department, noted that aside from Mr. Grayson's DUI, there were no other issues that he had during his tenure in the Army. So we can see somebody thought he was okay to seek employment outside of the Army. Now, should they have explored that more? Hindsight being 2020, we can all say yes. But the truth is, Mr. Grayson just was a bad guy. And he slipped through the cracks, and the cracks have resulted in this beautiful young lady losing her life. What else do we know about Mr. Grayson? Pleads guilty to 2 DUIs before he was hired by law enforcement. So what does this tell us? This guy is a rule breaker. This guy has no respect for the law. This guy has no respect for other human life. And we're going to employ him, give him a gun, put him on the streets to protect and serve. It just was a bad idea. He should have never been allowed to serve as a police officer. So let's read on. Asked on the employment application for the Auburn Police Department if he had ever been convicted of, charged with, or currently waiting trial for any crime greater than a minor traffic offense, to include driving while intoxicated. Grayson answered, no, I don't see any problem with that. I don't believe he was dishonest. That was up to Auburn Police Department and everybody else that hired him after that to use their discretion in deciding if he was somebody that needed to be serving on the streets in their community. What else do we know? Mr. Grayson lying, abuse of power during previous law enforcement stints. Grayson worked at 6 different law enforcement agencies in 4 years, according to his personnel file and the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. During his first year as an officer, Grayson bounced around 3 central Illinois police departments in Pawnee, Kincaid, and Verdun. His time at several of the agencies overlapped as he's worked part-time before obtaining a full-time position at the Auburn Police Department. So let's break that down. The pay, law enforcement, look, it's a highly respected profession. It's a much needed profession, but it's like being a school teacher. It's vital to our way of life. However, the pay just is not that great. So he wasn't paid a significant salary, I would imagine, which is probably why his time at several of these agencies probably overlapped. The guy just needed the extra money. Now, with that being said, that means there was several different opportunities for several agencies to press pause or say no to employing him, especially knowing his prior history. So what else do we know? In May 2022, Grayson went to the Logan County Sheriff's Office before he was hired by the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office a year later. A supervising officer rebuked Grayson for allegedly lying in reports and showing a general lack of integrity, according to a recording obtained by CBN News. The sheriff and I will not tolerate lying or deception, the officer can be heard telling Grayson, later adding, officers like you have been charged and they end up in jail. Now, kudos to this supervisor. I wish I knew who he was. I wish I could bring him on this live stream to tell the public why he went in so hard on the way he did and why he believes that was necessary in that moment, and the profession he's in, why it's so important for officers to have integrity, honesty, and respect members of the public. So what else do we know? Grayson was also accused of abusing his power and harassing a couple he pulled over and arrested during a traffic stop. Citing a disciplinary file from the Logan County Sheriff's Office, the file noted that the allegations by the couple against Grayson were deemed unfounded. So this is what happens, people. It happens over and over and over again. These officers, they start out, the bad officers, they start out, they abuse their power, they're rude to people, they curse people out, they mistreat people. And I'm not just pulling that out of a hat. It's happened to me more than once. And I'm about as nice and calm and easygoing and respectful as a person can be. I remember being cursed out by a police officer when I was a teenager. I was walking to the store to buy something for my grandmother, and this guy passes by. I'm walking alone, stops his car, tells me something rude. I'm scared, nervous. I just keep walking. I don't have any weapons on me. I don't have any drugs on me. That's not something I did. I played sports and went to school. So who knows who else he did that to during his time on the police force. Back to Mr. Grayson. Apparently, a couple made a complaint. Of course, it was deemed unfounded. There probably was no body cam of that complaint. We know Mr. Grayson doesn't believe in turning his body cam on. And those allegations went unaddressed, undisciplined. I'd imagine we're going to learn about many other instances where Mr. Grayson abused his power and it progressively got worse until ultimately this lady was murdered. That's it. She was murdered. There's no other explanation for it. It was cold-blooded murder. So what else do we know? Girard Police Chief Wayman Meredith told CBS that last year Grayson pressured him to call child service on a woman outside the home of Grayson's mother. Meredith described Grayson as steaming mad and said he'd flagged the incident to the Logan County Sheriff's Office. He was acting like a bully, Meredith told the outlet. Speaking about Grayson, he was wanting me to do stuff that was not kosher. He harasses this couple, they report him, nothing happened. The Girard police chief says, something's wrong with this guy. He's a bully, he's aggressive, he wants me to do stuff I should not be doing as a law enforcement officer. And he reported it. And what happened? Nothing. So this is where we need accountability, people. When these incidents happen, there needs to be vigilance in dealing with the officer. Look, get him help, get him counseling, suspend him, fire him, do whatever the heck needs to be done so innocent people aren't injured or killed which is ultimately what happened in this case. This guy was a ticking time bomb. He was a ticking time bomb, and people around him knew it, noticed it, even reported it. Nothing happened until the you-know-what hit the fan. Didn't have to happen, people, and we can do better. So what else? Of course, the sheriff's office, the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office said in a statement that it was not provided with any information regarding Grayson's alleged dishonesty or misconduct during his time at the Logan County Sheriff's Office. We were not provided any such information from any of Grayson's former employers, nor from any crediting agency. We cannot comment on whether the information is accurate, nor why it was not shared by another agency. So when I hear stuff like that, people, all I can say is you do not get to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich when you're putting people on the street to protect and serve, giving them a firearm, authorizing them to use it when appropriate. You don't get to stick your head in the sand when it comes to doing a thorough background, making sure this person is qualified, mentally stable and competent to go out and do the job. If you have the wrong person serving as an officer, guess who it's dangerous for? You, me, everybody. It's dangerous for the public. So the fact that the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office wants to be an ostrich here and stick their head in the sand and say, oh, we didn't know, nobody didn't tell us. You're the sheriff's office. Do a thorough background on this guy. Do a thorough investigation as if you were investigating a crime. And you should do that with all officers, all of them, every last one of them. That's one thing we can do to limit this kind of person ending up on our streets, endangering the public instead of protecting and serving. So I want to go to some of the videos that were released concerning Mr. Grayson, and we're going to dive into him a little bit. So here we go.
Department of Justice and a Springfield church will host a community healing and listening session, giving friends and neighbors a chance to mourn the loss of Sonya Massey.
The Springfield mother was shot to death by a now fired sheriff's deputy after she called 911 for help. Meanwhile, our Dave Savini has uncovered new details about that officer's past. And Dave, there are serious questions about why he was hired multiple times.
From one of Grayson's former police chiefs during a reference check for his next police job. It was a warning of the trouble Grayson had already caused. And it doesn't stop there. Another supervisor said he failed to obey orders, especially during the high-speed chase you're about to see.
The red flags and warning signs were there prior to Deputy Grayson firing those fatal shots into Sonya Massey, who's now charged with a murder, had a troubled career that began with a stint in the Army, a discharge for misconduct, then followed by more accusations of misconduct during his time in law enforcement, described as having trouble obeying orders. Like with what happened here at his 5th police job when he refused an order by a superior at the Logan County Sheriff's Department to terminate a high-speed chase over a traffic infraction, his speed at times reaching 110 miles per hour. But Grayson didn't stop. He did, however, turn off his lights and siren, but kept going anyways until he hit a deer.
Look at this guy. It's not just that he did this and was fired from this job. It's that he was hired other places. He was given a direct order to stop. What does he do? He turns off his siren. He turns off his lights. Now, what happens to me? What happens to you if we're driving down the road, speeding 100 miles an hour, and we turn our lights off? What happens to us? How is he any different? How is he special? How did he deserve to ever work in law enforcement again after that behavior? I would love to answer that. I don't have any answers. Other than me or you, we'd go to jail. We'd probably lose our job in the private sector because of that. We may even lose our driver's license for a while. Now, Mr. Grayson, he should have been terminated, no doubt about it. And I believe he was terminated from this job. That's not the problem here. He should have never been allowed to work in law enforcement again. He killed one of God's innocent creatures. He could have killed a person or many people. Anybody on the road that night could have died, could have been this guy's victim. Why didn't Sangamon County know about this? I do not know. But if whatever the reason is inexcusable, if there is a rule or a privacy right that prohibited them from knowing about it, then the state of Illinois needs to carve out an exception when it comes to law enforcement jobs and why a person was terminated from a prior job. Anybody that's put in a position of power that could potentially endanger members of the public, as part of the job, you should be willing to give up certain privacy rights, especially when those rights allow you to go out and continue to be a danger to society. You know, I do criminal defense work. My clients who are convicted felons, they don't get to hide that. They don't get to not disclose that on their job applications. Even if they get it expunged, if they're applying for a job with a state agency or a government entity or a law enforcement agency, guess what? Or the doctor's licensing board, a pharmacy licensing board, if a person has a convicted felon, even if those charges have been expunged from their record, there are still certain government agencies that can see those convictions. Why should police be any different? They shouldn't.
Did you violate a direct order
Yes.
from a supervisor about termination?
Yes, I did.
Grayson was questioned by a deputy chief and other top staff after that crash in Logan County.
Do you agree, before we conclude this, that there's a mountain of policy violations
Yes, I did.
that you committed? 7 months on, how are you still employed by us?
I don't know.
Yet he continued to get a pass over and over again. Even during the Logan County hiring process of Grayson, there were warning signs from another past employer, the Auburn, Illinois Police Department, where he worked in 2022. CBS News obtained these notes from a discussion between the Auburn chief and a representative from Logan County, where Grayson had applied for a new job. It states the Auburn chief said Grayson struggles with report writing, that he was very aggressive with getting drugs. The chief expressed concern that Grayson was too aggressive and that Grayson posted his drug arrests on Facebook, and the chief called him a bragger and was not great with evidence, left items laying around office. Sangamon County board member Mark Ayers is on the jail committee that authorizes the hiring of new sheriff deputies. He says he was never informed of any negative notes about Grayson prior to hire, and his background was not shared with the committee.
I would never bring on someone that had that troubled past or that record.
Member Mark Ayers is on the jail committee that authorizes the hiring of new sheriff deputies. He says he was never informed of any negative notes about Grayson prior to hire, and his background was not shared with the committee.
Grayson worked for 6 police agencies since 2020, ending with Sangamon County, where he was entrusted to help residents in need like Sonya Massey. Board members Ayers said he wants changes in the hiring and screening process, along with a background review of all current sheriff deputies.
Why wouldn't this be disclosed to Mark Ayers? This guy was in charge of making sure the officers who were hired were competent to do the job and were not dangerous. And for whatever reason, he wasn't informed. Look, that needs to be changed. That needs to be changed in Illinois and anywhere else where it's a problem. Otherwise, we'll continue to run into situations where innocent people are murdered. This is a murder. He's where he should be. Hopefully he remains. Because at a minimum, there needs to be a lesson there and a message sent to other bad actors, bad officers who subscribe to the mentality of Sean Grayson. So let's see what else we learned.
We're learning new details about the former deputy who was fired after the deadly shooting of a black woman in Illinois. Sonya Massey called 911 saying she suspected a possible intruder outside her home. Body camera video shows deputies responding to Massey's house. Shots were fired after she picked up what appears to be a pot of boiling water from her stove. The family says Massey was unarmed. The former deputy, Sean Grayson, has pleaded not guilty to charges, including first-degree murder. He was arrested and remains in custody. Now, new original reporting from NBC News finds Grayson worked for 6 law enforcement agencies since 2020. That's according to Illinois law enforcement records, and even had his own previous run-ins with the law. NBC News national reporter Janelle Griffith is behind this new reporting. Janelle, walk us through what exactly you found.
I'm actually less concerned about that than I am about the fact that there were reports of mistreatment of other members of the public that were, it appears nothing was ever done about it. And there was reports of him violating policies of agencies he worked for, like blatantly ignoring direct orders, and especially in the high-speed chase where he turns the siren and lights off and is driving in the dark and hits a deer. This guy, I don't understand why this guy should ever be allowed to continue. How you doing, Mr. Daniels? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I got some special guests in the room with me. I got Avery and Hope joining us remotely on daddy duties as we do this.
So for those of you who don't know who this is, my law partner, Harry Daniels. What you doing, Avery? Say hey to your favorite uncle. All right, so right now we on these. I'm going to run through this video right here, Harry, that we have with the Mr. Graysons. I'm having a little technical difficulty here with this video, but
Records show the former deputy who shot Sonya Massey worked for multiple departments in the state of Illinois in just a handful of years. Senior investigative reporter Paula Vassan delves into how law enforcement officers in the state of Illinois are tracked. Paula.
Legal experts tell us the state of Illinois has something Missouri does not have, a way to search for police officers to check their work history. It shows former sheriff's deputy Sean Grayson worked for 6 different agencies in the state of Illinois in just 4 years. But the public website does not show the full picture, revealing hired and separation dates without explanation. State records show 30-year-old Grayson hopped around as a part-time officer at 3 small departments. He had a full-time job at a 4th department and worked at 2 sheriff's offices.
What do you think about this? The fact that he had all these different jobs over a 4-year period.
I think what happened is probably he had all these different jobs, and probably what happened is every time he was getting in trouble or he was on the verge of some kind of misconduct, what he probably did was he probably just quit that job in lieu of being fired. A lot of police officers do that. So in order not to be fired for the misconduct or the bad act that they committed, they just simply resign, and then they go to another local agency, maybe in the same city, maybe the next city or the next town over, and then they start the same bad conduct again, and then it just repeats itself over and over again.
You've been practicing law over 17 years. Is that right?
17 years.
And is that common? What we see with Mr. Grayson, just a one-off or a random occurrence with all these different jobs, or is this something you frequently see in your own practice?
No, I think it's something that a lot of rogue or bad officers, how they conduct business. I was on the de-escalation task force here in Louisiana before, and that was an issue. When somebody commits a bad act, there's no real way for the misconduct to follow. But I think, from my understanding of Mr. Grayson's case, in this particular area, they actually had an ability to track these bad officers. However, through connections, overlooking of the bad, he was able to still get jobs. So I think a bad officer generally just resigns to avoid being fired and have that in their personnel file. And if somebody calls, and I think there's some rules against disclosing if somebody resigns as opposed to being fired.
So I gotta ask this: are the citizens of Louisiana at a threat of encountering a Sean Grayson. Based on the current structure of our law enforcement with respect to background checks and making sure these officers are not a threat.
The agencies that regulate police officers is called Peace Officer Certification. They're both certified, and a lot of times what happens is if an officer resigns, if an officer doesn't have a felony or misdemeanor conviction, there's no way for the certification to even affect their certification because they're not putting notice that this officer has committed misconduct. Of course, you have the blue wall. Police officers generally stick together. There are a lot of good officers, but there are also some bad officers. And in this case, Louisiana citizens are in danger of it because there's really no way to track these bad officers when they commit misconduct because they just move around a lot and there's no way really to track them unless there's some rule or law enacted that even if an officer isn't fired or charged with a felony, there should still be some checks and balances in place to follow these officers around so the public or the new employer, who would be a police station or a sheriff's office, could be aware that this officer has some issues in the past. And they could, I guess, exercise some form of patience or pause when considering whether or not to hire this particular individual.
Let me ask you this. What stops a sheriff from, let's say, if a sheriff from East Baton Rouge wants to hire an officer and the officer formerly worked in West Baton Rouge, what's stopping that sheriff from calling the other sheriff to say, hey, what happened with this guy? Why'd you let him go? Why is he no longer working there?
I don't really know the answer to that question. Assuming that most sheriffs don't. They have a human resource department that's in charge of gathering that information to put the sheriff on notice. But I'm unaware of any rule that would prohibit another chief of police or another sheriff's office from calling the other agencies to find that information out.
Do you think it would be difficult to set up some kind of database that was limited to only law enforcement agencies, that required law enforcement agencies to indicate the reason why an officer no longer worked for them and allowed future employers only in law enforcement to see the reasons?
No, I think there's databases for everything. There's a trademark database that law enforcement can determine whether or not somebody has a previous or a current restraining order against them. There's also determine whether or not somebody is a felon. To quickly run their background check. There's all sorts of checks and balances in place, but the issue is law enforcement would have to, someone, either the governor or somebody high up would have to make a decision that this information is important and needs to be monitored and kept, and a record needs to be made of it in order for this information to be made available when considering hiring decisions. In fact, I think there's actually a database that was recently installed in Louisiana to what's called a database, or a database that helps people be aware of officers that have been accused of misconduct or found guilty on the civil side or the criminal. I think the Innocence Project, along with some other groups, have that database which they've been given information. But I think the problem here in Louisiana is we have a lot of small and rural areas that don't necessarily add that information or keep that information up to date in order to make the public aware and also make the employers aware that this particular officer has some misconduct, whether it's a felony charge, whether it's excessive force, or whether it's some allegations of being untruthful in some reports and that sort of thing.
All right, so it sounds like we need something in place to police the police. At least the ones that are going out committing crimes. It sounds like we need something in place to police the police, at least the ones that are going out committing crimes.
Yeah, like I said, back in, I think in 2020, the former Governor Edwards had convened this, what's called a de-escalation task force, and I was part of that. And that was one topic kicked around, but that issue never even made it a task force, because there was a lot of opposition to it. Because they alleged that there was some kind of violation of federal employment laws if that database exists, or if that information was put in officers' files, that it presented potential lawsuits if that came about. I just agree. I think in every other industry or in every other walk of life, people are denied employment for various reasons, prior acts, whether it's on another job or whether it was when they were a kid or for whatever reason. So I think that database would be very easy, and the police officers are working in the public. So I think it would be necessary in this case to stop the Sean Graysons of the world from going around and around and avoiding consequences by simply going to another agency. I could think of even as close home in Louisiana, I know a few officers that had got in trouble at the Berry Parish Sheriff's Office. They left there, they went to Youngsville, or they went to General Police Department, or they went to Baldwin Police Department, and they just cycle around. I could think of a few officers off the top of my head that they just do that. They get in trouble, written up for some kind of misconduct, whether it's lying in a police report, maybe using excessive force. They get sued in federal court, and in lieu of getting fired, they resign. And a couple months later, they pop up in one of these smaller police agencies and have a job and go right back on the street. When in the other town, they have some issues that they testify because their testimony may not be believed because they may have lied in another police report or had some other kind of nefarious act that they did.
All of his jobs in central Illinois. We've also discovered he had 2 misdemeanor DWI convictions in Macoupin County. The I-team is working to find out what's being done in the state to prevent officers with potentially bad track records from bouncing around. Industry sources tell us it's the responsibility of the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board to allow an officer to be hired somewhere else. The I-team has reached out to that board for an explanation into how Grayson kept getting hired. We're waiting to hear back. We've also discovered that in general, sovereign immunity in state law often prohibits negligent hiring cases against state entities like police departments. It means it can be easier for bad hires to slip through the cracks.
Illinois Fraternal Order of Police is calling for the reinstatement of former Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson. He's currently in jail on first-degree murder charges for shooting 36-year-old Sonya Massey in her home after she called 911 earlier this month. Our Capitol Bureau Chief, Cole Hinkey, has more.
And I'm going to read the statement. The grievance was terminated without just cause. Further, the employer publicly disseminated details of the investigation and termination on Facebook in violation of the CBA collective bargaining agreement, and prior to giving the grievance or his representatives notice of the decision to terminate. Remedies are reinstatement and reimbursement of all lost wages, restoration of all lost benefits, and any other appropriate relief. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's definitely a loophole in the law. I think this seems like the police union stepped in and said the chief, whoever fired Mr. Grayson, in some capacity or some form, violated some administrative rule. Therefore, Mr. Grayson was not only given his job back, he also was given full reimbursement for all money that he lost during that time period. So in this particular case, I would assume it seems that Mr. Grayson was a member of some kind of police union in Illinois or sheriff's union, whatever law enforcement he was working for, and they stepped in and said, you fired him, and you violated some rules because you put the public on notice that he had did these bad things prior to putting him and his representative on notice. And I guess his representative, at most hearings when you have law enforcement go before the board for a termination hearing, they can have legal counsel present. So it seems like the chief or sheriff violated some administrative rule, and Mr. Grayson got the benefit of it, and was allowed to get back on the street and get his gun back.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some due process rights that were in place that Mr. Grayson was entitled to, and I'm all for individuals being given due process under our laws. However, our rights have to come secondary a lot of times to what's in the best interest of the community as a whole and public safety and national security. So we routinely subjugate some of our rights to the government in the interest of our society as a whole. So whatever due process rights Mr. Grayson was entitled to, I'm sure as they go through the process, his termination would be upheld. Certainly, nobody should expect him to be reinstated paid and put back on the street. That's just absurd, but I understand he has these rights. Hopefully they can expedite the process and be done with it. So the last thing I want to talk about today with respect to Mr. Grayson is really Sonya Massey's son and what he had to say about all of this.
The shooting of a black woman inside her own home is sparking national outrage this morning. Sonya Massey, a 36-year-old black woman, was gunned down by a deputy after she called 911 to report a possible prowler at her home. She called for help and ended up dead. She was shot seconds after police had given to remove a pot of boiling water from the stove. The officer then drew his gun, causing her to duck for cover. She was shot 3 times in her own home. Now her family is demanding to know why the deputy who pulled the trigger was hired in the first place. His personnel file revealed a troubling employment history and past DUI charges. I am joined now by Sonia's son, Malachi, and civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who is representing the Massey family. Thank you both for coming in this morning. I know, Malachi, that you are heartbroken. Can you tell me first how you found out that your mother had been shot and killed?
So basically, I take my dad to work at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever. I came home, then I was getting back into bed. As soon as I was like finna go back to sleep, I got a call, and it was like a random number. I didn't know who it was, but I answered it. And that's when they said, your mother has been shot, and it went through her eye and it came out her neck. And they just was saying somebody. They kept on saying somebody shot her. And I said who, and they wouldn't tell me who. I'm like, who? And they just said somebody. Next thing you know, I get up. I wasn't even thinking. I was like, I got to get to my grandma's house. And then I told my grandma what happened, and she was just in disbelief. Just like me, I didn't want to believe it. And then we didn't find out that it was a police officer until a day after, too. That's the thing. So we were just left clueless, honestly.
What do you think should happen to the officer? I know that you have told me that you have not watched the video, which would be so traumatic for you. But what do you think should happen to the officer who took your mother's life?
I think he should be, man, honestly, he need like something, because there's no way in the world that should have happened to my mother.
I think based on what I saw in the video, I didn't see Miss Massey posing any threat to either of the officers. I'm not sure what triggered Mr. Grayson off. And what I can see in the video, when you slow the video down, Ms. Massey had 2 arguments in her hand. And I agree with her son. I think he should have a life sentence based on his actions. It was a cold-blooded murder. Ms. Massey basically just told him a religious quote and triggered him, but there was no danger in it. That pot never left off of the counter from what I can tell. And Ms. Massey actually got on her knees begging not to be shot.
One of the things she said to him was, I'm sorry. Her comment was, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And what she actually said to him was, I'm sorry. And he ended up shooting her. There's some reports he's claiming, she had a pot of hot water. He didn't want to be burned by hot water. She was maybe about 10 feet away from him. The fact that she had a pot of boiling water and was approximately 10 feet away from him as a criminal defense lawyer, do you think you could reasonably argue justifiable homicide by Mr. Grayson?
I think in this case it's going to be hard for Mr. Grayson to argue that he was justified in killing Ms. Massey based on his reasonable belief that he was in danger. She said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, and then he cursed her out. And then Ms. Massey backed away from the counter. She didn't have the pot in her hand. She actually kneeled on the ground, and then she was shot. I think he's going to have a very hard time convincing 12 people that he acted within reasonableness of a police officer. Now, of course, they're going to argue and say that this police officer was in a high-stress situation, and I'm sure they're going to come with something else and say maybe he had PTSD from some earlier event in his law enforcement career that may have triggered him. But I don't see self-defense or reasonableness or justification in this particular case for Mr. Grayson.
Thank you for coming on and providing commentary. That was very much needed first today. Once again, if you found this content useful, please the video, go to YouTube, subscribe to Great Elephant Law. You can follow our law firm, Daniels in Washington. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We also have our personal profiles. Mine is Great Elephant Law on Instagram and just my name, Christopher Washington, on Facebook. How about you, Harry? What's your name on Instagram if they want to find you?
My Instagram name is Attorney Number One. So they can find me there on Instagram, and if they're on Facebook, they can follow me at Harry Daniels III on Facebook, and also Champions for Justice on Instagram as well.
If y'all have any questions for us, feel free to leave a comment under the video or go find us on social media and DM us. We will try to continue, that's the goal, but we do have a lot of trials. We try a lot of cases to juries. We have a lot of hearings in our criminal and civil matters, civil being personal injury. If you need our legal advice or legal representation in any of those areas, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a good evening and peace.
Great elephant in the court, stomping ground, defending the innocent, justice profound.